It was an unremarkable afternoon, the kind where time stretched lazily, and there outside carried the thick warmth of summer. I had just finished my coffee, still dressed in my comfortable linen pants, and an old, soft t-shirt, my feet bare against the cool hardwood floor. The house was unusually quiet. No television. Murmuring in the background. Nowhere of the dish. Washer, just the slow ticking of the clock and the occasional rustling of leaves outside. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't the light, hesitant tap of a delivery person, nor the forceful rapping of someone in a rush. It was firm, deliberate. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone curious. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and padded to the door. As I pulled it open, I found myself face to face with someone I hadn't expected. Ethan, my neighbor's husband. Ethan was the kind of man who carried himself with an effortless confidence. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair that somehow made him look even more distinguished. He always had a friendly, easygoing demeanor. We exchanged pleasantries over the years, nothing more than the occasional wave when he was mowing the lawn or a brief chat when we crossed paths outside. But today he stood on my porch, his hands tucked into the pockets of office jeans, his brow slightly furrowed. "Hey, Lydia," he said, his voice warm, but Ed with something I couldn't quite place. "Sorry to drop by," unannounced. I smiled politely, stepping aside to let him in. "No problem, everything." "Okay." He hesitated for half a second before stepping over the threshold. "Yeah, just needed a breather." I nodded, closing the door behind him. "Coffee?" I offered, motioning toward the kitchen. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "That would be great." I moved to the counter, feeling the weight of his presence behind me. There was something in his stance, the way he leaned against the edge of the island, that told me he wasn't just here for coffee. As I poured, he finally spoke. "Again, things have been complicated at home," he admitted. "I just needed to get out for a bit." I glanced over my shoulder at him, the coffee pot in one hand. "I see is everything okay with Claire?" Claire, his wife, was a lovely woman. Always put together, always polite. But I had noticed lately that the two of them weren't as in sync as they once were. There had been fewer smiles, fewer shared glances. Ethan let out a quiet chuckle, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's just say marriage isn't always easy." I nodded in understanding. I had been married once long ago. I knew the way love could shift, how it could become something you barely recognized. I handed him his cup, and for a brief moment, as our fingers brushed, I felt an odd charge in the air. Something unexpected. He seemed to notice it too, because he cleared his throat and quickly pulled his hand away. For the next few minutes, we talked about simple things: neighbors, the weather, the way summer was winding down. But there was an undercurrent to the conversation, something unspoken. At one point, he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter, his eyes searching mine. "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" I swallowed, my fingers tightening around my cup. "Yeah." Ito, it was an admission I hadn't planned, to make the air between us thickened. A strange tension settling in. Neither of us looked away, and for a moment, I thought he might say something that would shift the weight of this interaction into something more. But then he leaned back, letting out a breathy laugh. "Sorry, I didn't mean to dump all that on you." I smiled, though my heart was still beating a little too fast. "It's okay." He glanced at the clock and stood up. "You should probably head back." I nodded, following him to the door as he reached for the handle. He hesitated again, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Thanks, Lydia," he said quietly, "for listening," and then he was gone. I closed the door behind him, pressing my back against it, my fingers still warm from where they had touched his. I told myself it was nothing but something told me this wasn't the last time Ethan would come. Knocking the days that followed were strangely restless. I told myself that Ethan's visit was nothing more than a neighbor, seeking a moment of escape, that his words didn't carry any deeper meaning. But if that were true, Why did I keep replaying our conversation in my head? Why did I find myself glancing toward their house whenever I stepped outside? Wondering if I'd see him again. I tried to push it aside to go about my routine as if nothing had changed, but something had it wasn't, until a week later that he came back. This time I saw him approaching through the kitchen window. It was early evening, the sky burning with the deep oranges and purples of sunset, and he walked with a purpose that sent my pulse skittering. I barely had time to compose myself before he knocked. I opened the door to find him standing there, hands in his pockets again. But this time, there was something different in his expression, something more deliberate. "Hey," he said, his voice. "Steady mind, if I come in." I hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Of course he walked past me, and his eyes meeting mine with quiet intensity. I should probably start by saying that I don't know what I'm doing. I let out a soft, nervous laugh. "That makes two of us." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about." The other day my stomach tightened. "Ethan," he held up a hand. "I'm not here to cross any lines. I don't know. I feel like you actually see me do. You know how great that is." His words sent a shiver through me, because God helped me. I knew exactly what he meant. I had spent so much of my feeling invisible, overlooked. And now here was this man, this kind, complicated man standing in my kitchen, telling me that I mattered. I swallowed hard. "I see you, Ethan. But I don't know what that means." He took a step closer, his voice quieter now. "I don't either." The space between us felt electric, charged with something unspoken yet undeniable. My heart pounded as he studied my face as if searching for permission to say more, to do more, and for one reckless moment, I wanted to let whatever this was unfold. But then, just as suddenly as the moment had built, he stepped back, shaking his head with a ruthful smile. I should go, I nodded, though part of me wanted to tell him to stay. He hesitated at the door, looking at me one last time before walking out into the fading light. As the door clicked shut behind him, I leaned against it, pressing a hand to my chest. This was dangerous, and yet deep down I knew this wasn't over. The next few days dragged by in a blur. Every time I passed by Ethan's house, I found myself glancing over, half expecting to see him standing there, waiting, but he didn't come back. Not for days. The silence between us grew, and it began to weigh on me. My thoughts kept returning to the feeling of his presence, that inexplicable pull I had experienced. Each time we were near one another, I kept telling myself I was being foolish. He was married. I was Noon's temptation. I had no business thinking about him, no matter how easy it was to imagine what it might feel like to be seen, really seen by someone like him. But one evening, when the sun had just dipped below the horizon and the world outside was a canvas of shadows, there came another knock, this time when I opened the door. It was Ethan again, standing there. In the dimming light, his expression was different this time. Graver, more determined. "I need to talk to you, Lydia," he said softly. I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat. "Ethan." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I can't stop thinking about you." The words were so simple, yet they landed like a heavy weight in the air between us for a long moment. Neither of us moved. "You're married?" I whispered, though it didn't sound like it was the thing I wanted to say. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know. But that doesn't change how I feel." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if the gravity of the moment had frozen me in place. "I've been with CLA for over 30 years. He continued, his voice raw. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel alive when I'm with you." I felt my breath catch in my chest the way he was looking at me. It was as if he saw all of me, all of the quiet parts I had tucked away for so long. "I don't know what to do with that," he admitted, the vulnerability in his voice pulling me in. "I don't know either," I replied. my voice barely. Aga whisper. There was no more pretense. Between us. No more small talk. The space between us had become so thin that I could feel the warmth of his breath. Hartha, soft hitch of highs. Exhale. His gaze was steady, filled with something deeper than desire. A connection I hadn't realized we were both searching for. I don't want to hurt anyone, Lydia, he said quietly, but I don't want to lose this feeling either. I could feel my heart racing. I could feel everything inside of me pulling toward him, but I held back desperately, trying to gather the words that would bring me back to reason. I don't want to hurt you either, Ethan, I said softly, my voice trembling. But it's complicated. For a long time, there was only silence. The weight of everything that had been said hung in the air like a storm cloud, neither of us willing to break it. Finally, he took a step back, his shoulders sagging slightly. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry, Lydia. He turned toward the door, but before he reached the handle, I called out, Ethan. Wait. He stopped looking at me, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. I didn't know what came over me in that moment, but all the barriers I had built around my heart seemed to dissolve. I crossed the room, Tustin in front of him. I don't have the answers either, I said quietly. But I can't pretend like nothing has changed. I can't ignore how I feel. He reached out, then slowly, as if testing the air between us. His hand gently brushed against mine, and the electricity between us flared once more. I don't want to walk away from this, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't either, I whispered back, and for the first time we closed the distance. It wasn't about crossing a line, it wasn't about taking something that wasn't ours to take. It was about two people acknowledging the connection they shared, the undeniable pull that had been building between them in that moment. Webbeth knew we had reached a place of mutual understanding. No pretenses, no expectations, just the raw honesty of two souls, trying to figure out where they went from here. When he left that night, the air between us was lighter. Somehow. It wasn't there. Solution I had expected, but it was something else. Something just as powerful. We didn't have all the answers. But for once, I felt seen, and I realized that sometimes just being seen is all you really need to begin again.